We will delve deeper into this critical juncture with two experts offering contrasting perspectives. Joining us from Moscow is Mr. Sergey Markov, the former advisor to President Vladimir Putin, and from New York, Ms. Irina Tsukerman, the political researcher specializing in U.S.-Russia relations. Welcome to Think Tank. Mr. Markov, how do you assess the latest U.S. sanctions package targeting Russia's banking and energy sector? And what is Moscow's official stance on these new punitive measures?
Of course, sanctions against Russia is negative to the Russian economy and to Russian society. But at the same time, we can see that more than 30,000 sanctions against Russia has not so big result. Economic growth of Russian economy bigger than economic growth in the United States and much more bigger than, in fact, almost zero economic growth in the European Union. So pressure on Russia by sanctions will have no any result. I think Donald Trump understands this very well.
Ms. Tsukerman, how significant really are the new sanctions proposed by the U.S. in the context of the ongoing war in Ukraine?
Thank you for the question. Much, of course, will depend on whether Donald Trump ultimately signs them into law. But assuming that they proceed as expected, they can put significant amount of pressure further straining Russian economy. Among entities that is expected to be sanctioned is Gazprom, Russia's gas giant that is part of the cartel along with its Qatari and Iranian counterpart. Sanctioning Gazprom will put a significant strain not only on Russia independently, but on its economic collaboration with its counterparts. Other economic and energy infrastructure is going to be particularly significant because it's also sanctioning. It would also sanction secondary. It would place secondary sanctions, including on foreign intermediaries. Ranging from India to Turkey to China, making it much more difficult for those countries and entities in those countries to facilitate Russia's economy. Of course, it is not expected that this economic strain would necessarily force Russia into territorial concessions, but it would make it much more difficult to continue fueling the conflict and sustaining basic economy. Internally, Russia's economy is already under pressure, even though in response to the war, it has turned towards so-called fortress or siege economy, which is focused on war production. In 2025, we are seeing a downward turn, even under those circumstances that are generally beneficial for economy. In wartime, additional sanctions would make it difficult for Russia to import components it needs for making weapons and put it in a weaker position vis-a-vis Ukraine. As it is, Russia is already losing a significant amount of equipment, and much of its military activity is focused on bombarding Ukrainian civilian structures and cities rather than on the combat in the field. And we have seen that in the past year and a half, Russia has not been able to make any significant advances.
Mr. Markov, do you think that the US-Ukraine precious metals agreement could change President Trump's rapprochement with Russia? Is Russia alarmed by the minerals agreement between the US and Ukraine?
Of course, new colony mineral deal, which had been signed by Ukrainian President Zelensky, give some future opportunity for United States possible, but it's a very long-term agreement, and actually it will not influence too much. What is more important that Zelensky, who was in difficult personal relations with Donald Trump, now accept all Donald Trump demands. That's why Donald Trump maybe now has a more positive approach to the personally Vladimir Zelensky. I think it's important personally for Zelensky because the main goal of Zelensky is to get approval from Donald Trump and from Europe for his staying as president of Ukraine without elections. It means keeping some kind of military conditions for Ukraine for not allowing to the election to happen. It's one of the main political goals of Zelensky, because Zelensky understands he will lose any elections, which will be approximately free and fair. It means that United States, after this mineral deal, maybe will accept more Zelensky personally. But frankly speaking, we don't believe that Donald Trump will impose sanctions too much against Russia, and that he will give too much weaponry to the Ukrainian army. Because it was clear absolutely for Donald Trump that these sanctions against Russia not good for the American economy, because it's moved the Russian economy as ally to the Chinese economy. And also Donald Trump understands very much that any dollar which giving to the Ukrainian army is lost dollar. That's why we don't expect increasing of the U.S. military support to the Ukrainian regime of Zelensky.
Ms. Tsukerman, given President Trump's previous sympathetic stance towards Russia, what factors might influence his decision to approve or reject these sanctions?
I think a lot will depend on whether Putin cooperates and provides at least some incentive for continuing negotiation, or whether he continues to reject all demands. And so far he has. President Zelensky has once again proposed a full ceasefire, which Putin has rejected. And this is not something that U.S. is happy about. U.S. announced withdrawal from negotiations, not only because of Ukraine, but because they don't see a ceasefire or the end of the war is possible in the short term due to the Kremlin's intransigence. And this is why this economic sanctions package is even being considered. Donald Trump has gone out of his way to be as accommodating to Russia's demands and expectations as humanly possible, but has received less than nothing in return, not a position that a U.S. president would ever fully accept, no matter what economic advantages he sees in potential rapprochement with Moscow. We are also seeing that this agreement with Ukraine has had a significant impact on the thinking. We see that, first of all, that this agreement is structured differently from the previous versions. It's not just that Zelensky accepted demands by Donald Trump, it's that Donald Trump has backed away from many of his most extreme demands. And while this agreement does not provide Ukraine with security guarantees, it also leaves it also acknowledges sovereignty over the mineral resources, and it's not approved by Ukrainian parliament, so it can be renegotiated at any time. And furthermore, most importantly, it provides strategic messaging that U.S. is backing Ukraine's sovereignty claims. There's also a practical benefit, showing a growing U.S.-Ukrainian cooperation by lifting some of the sanctions on the frozen military assistance to Ukraine and allowing cash purchases of more advanced U.S. weapons, which would give Ukraine a significant strategic military advantage. So it's not just economic sanctions, it's a combination of different factors, and we're seeing that the more Russia digs in and refuses to compromise on any issues, the more it will actually turn off Donald Trump, no matter what his position on Russia actually is. He wants to see at least some give and take.
Mr. Markov, President Putin has dismissed calls for a ceasefire. So what conditions does Russia insist on for negotiations to move forward?
It's different things, ceasefire and negotiation. First of all, about ceasefire. Russia suggested a humanitarian ceasefire on 3 days because we have victory day of the victory of the Nazi regime in World War II. This had been denied by Zelensky. Zelensky and also Washington suggested 1 month ceasefire with continuation of this ceasefire and negotiation during this period. Russia denies this because very simple reason. Russia already has experience of 2 previous ceasefire with Ukrainian regime and Western countries behind them. It's called Minsk I agreement and the Minsk II agreement. Both of them have been used just for the increasing of the military capacity of Ukrainian army and for moving again to the new stage of war, more bloody war, more intensive war. And leaders of former leaders of France and Germany, Holland and Merkel, they directly told that their goal from the beginning was not real ceasefire, not real peace, but just to take some period for Ukrainian army for recovering its military facilities. As Russia understands, now Europe and United States want to repeat same model, just to use ceasefire as a way to the recovering of military capacity of Ukraine, and means the war will be again but more bloody and more intense. Russia suggested, that's why Russia suggested not just ceasefire, but conditional ceasefire, meaning that during ceasefire, it will be embargo for the supplying of Ukrainian army from the Western countries. It's about ceasefire. It's about negotiation. Russia suggested negotiation to start immediately as soon as possible, direct negotiation between Russia and Ukraine without any conditions. Zelensky denies this. Zelensky demands that such direct negotiation between Russia and Ukraine should be only conditionally. It means only after Russia agree on the long-term ceasefire. So it's some kind of a deadlock if United States will not increase its pressure against Vladimir Zelensky. No ceasefire will happen, no direct negotiation will happen.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Tsukerman, how would you evaluate the diplomatic efforts by Washington and European allies to bring about a compromise between Kiev and Moscow?
I think without imposing secondary sanctions, it's going to be very difficult to force Russia into any sort of negotiating positions, because so long as Russia feels impunity in continuing to attack Ukrainian civilians, and so far as there's no significant pressure, and it has economic opportunities to continue to refuel its forces and to continue fighting, it will do so. It has no incentive to stop. A country that entered an illegal war and has abducted thousands of civilians, including children, has obviously no ethical framework that would be conducive to normal diplomacy without teeth. I think it's also reasonable for Zelensky to demand a long-term ceasefire before entering any serious negotiations. What leader would want to continue engaging in empty talk while civilians are being attacked and killed? It's his responsibility to defend his population against foreign aggression. So I don't see, without very significant pressure on the Kremlin and the seriousness of U.S. intentions, that anything will come out from these discussions. The positions between the two sides are too different. Ukraine is trying to survive. It's fighting for its existence and sovereignty, whereas Russia is looking to kill as many Ukrainian civilians as possible, even if it cannot achieve a military victory. Those are not positions that can be reconciled through normal discussions, obviously.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Markov, how is President Putin's stance on the negotiations influencing the current situation? You've mentioned that Russia wants to resume the negotiations under no conditions, but what are the prospects really for a diplomatic resolution then in the near future, keeping in mind President President Zelensky's remarks about Russia refusing to stop the war?
I think Vladimir Zelensky lied, and I also think that his defense, this lady from Washington, also lied. You should take into account that for Russia, Russian and Ukrainian people, the same people. Kiev was the capital of Russia during 3 centuries, and 80% of the people in Ukraine, their native language is Russian language. In fact, they're Russians. And Ukrainians, it's just part of the Russia. It's just region of the Russia. And that's why Vladimir Putin gives the order to Russian army to be very, very much careful about civilians, because for us, Ukrainian civilians, it's our civilians, it's our Russian people. And is to talk about diplomatic resolution. What is important is to resolve the real problem of such war, and the real reason of such war is, first of all, the repressive character of the Ukrainian regime. We believe that this regime is terroristic regime, which is terror against people in Ukraine. The main goal of this terror is to change identity of the Ukrainian Russian people to make them anti-Russian. It means, for example, prohibition of Russian language is main tool, main methods of such policy. That's why Russia demands stop political repression against Russian language, which is, by the way, the native language of majority of Ukrainian people, and stop political repression against Orthodox Church, which is combined Russia and Ukraine. If Western countries would not agree with these Russian demands, the war will be continued. Because we understand that Western countries want to make relations between Russia and Ukraine as Russia and anti-Russia. They want a relation between Russia and Ukraine as between Israel and Palestine, as between India and Pakistan, which is absolutely not acceptable for Russia. It means that for us, if these main Russian demands of denazification and stopping of repression against Russian identity will be not get agreement, it means that new war will be absolutely inevitable in the new future. So Vladimir Putin wants to stop not only this war, but also very close future, more bloody war. And I think your interest also to agree with Vladimir Putin, because if this new war will happen more intensive, it could lead to the escalation, to the nuclear catastrophe and the destroying of the all human. That's why we're interested to have a real diplomatic solution, but that not just ceasefire and preserving this Ukrainian regime. Ukrainian regime not democratic, not legal, and we demand free democratic election in Ukraine.
Ms. Tsukerman, so now we have it all laid out, the Ukrainian demands, the Russian demands, the mediation efforts from the US and European allies, the concerns, the Russian concerns of even future conflicts emerging. What are the key challenges and opportunities for achieving a lasting peace in Ukraine?
Well, I have to say, I have to agree with Mr. Markov on one thing. There is a very high likelihood of future conflicts emerging, and Russia is the source of all those conflicts, including in Europe. And if I'm not mistaken, he just threatened nuclear war against everybody, including possibly Egypt, after saying that it's in your interest to support Russia on this. He also made a very curious comment, which I think is important to note. He mentioned that Ukrainians are actually Russians. In that case, that begs the question: why is Russia bombing its own population if this is how they perceive the situation? And this is what they're willing to do to their own population as they see it. Can you imagine what they would be willing to do to foreign populations if they don't meet Russian demands? So, in order to achieve a sustainable peace, this sort of reasoning needs to be dropped. Russia needs to be able to admit admit that to be forced to respect sovereignty, borders, and basic international norms and laws. It cannot continue to make wild claims and violating other countries' sovereign territories whenever it feels like it. Today, it claims that it owns Ukraine. Tomorrow, it claims that Berlin and Paris and London are its sovereign territories because some Russian populations reside there. This is absurd, and you cannot engage in serious diplomacy when you have unserious people looking for any excuse to continue aggression.
Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Mr. Sergey Markov, the former advisor to President Vladimir Putin, and Ms. Irina Tsukerman, the political researcher specializing in US-Russia relations. Thank you very much for your insights here on Think Tank.